What you're about to see is one of those rare moments in Washington where the truth doesn't explode. It cuts. Quietly, surgically, precisely. And somehow that makes it even more devastating. Because when an FBI director can't explain why he's buying tens of thousands of dollars in semiconductor stocks, while a school shooting unfolds in the district of the congressman questioning him, you're not looking at a scandal. You're looking at a system failure, a moral failure, a leadership failure in the very institution that claims to protect us.
Thank you, Director Patel, for being here today. I have a couple of questions regarding a terrible shooting that occurred in Colorado, a state that, as you may know, that I represent. You've testified previously about, I think, what you would describe as your efforts to provide more information regarding the investigation with respect to the horrific assassination of Mr. Kirk. And so, in that same vein, I'm hoping you can provide this committee and my constituents in Colorado with some clarity.
Absolutely.
I think, as my colleagues know, in Evergreen, Colorado, Jefferson County, a county that I proudly represent, at Evergreen High School, a shooter ultimately injured. 2 students were praying for their swift recovery. There's an article here from Colorado Public Radio. The title is, quote, FBI was already investigating an account that may have been linked to the Evergreen shooter. You're familiar with the circumstances generally, Director, regarding this terrible tragedy.
Yes.
So my understanding from the public reporting is that an organization reported to the FBI in July of this year regarding, just reading here from the article, that the FBI opened an assessment into a social media account user whose identity was unknown and who was discussing the planning of a mass shooting with threats nonspecific in nature. This is the FBI's statement to the press. And that the FBI continued to work this assessment investigation to identify the name and location of the user up until September 10th, 2025, which is the day of the tragedy. Can you provide us some clarity on what were the impediments to finding, the account user, and maybe describe in greater detail the FBI's work in that regard?
Generally speaking, yes, because I know even though the shooter's deceased, the investigation we're not done.
Sure.
And so the impediments to finding these individuals, and you highlight a great point. We had 2 huge tragedies in the span of days in this country, the school shooting in Evergreen, Colorado being one of them. And proactively going out onto these social media platforms, which are so large, is our biggest impediment. And we need to rely on the service providers. There's actual legislation, I can't remember the name of it, that's up for renewal, which will, and I think at the end of the month, which gives service providers the ability to report that information in from their end without liability. We need that to continue, because while the FBI has so many people and the police are great at doing it, there's just too many platforms to cover down on.
Well, I appreciate that, Director Patel, and I think we're certainly, I'm interested to continue this conversation, because I think the reporting suggests that there's a pattern, and that ultimately we want to make sure that law enforcement is able to prevent this kind of tragedy from happening in the future. I have a question. It's not meant as a gotcha question, so it just frame it there. But it is in regards to some reporting around a periodic transaction report that you had filed earlier, this year. So this is in July, pursuant to the ethical obligations as a senior executive official. You remember filing that in July?
Yes.
Yeah, so
Neguse opens with the reality that too many lawmakers avoid. A school shooting in Evergreen, Colorado. 2 students injured, a community traumatized. And before the bodies were even stabilized in the hospital, the FBI already knew this wasn't some unpredictable tragedy. They had been investigating an account connected to the shooter for months. Months. They had digital crumbs, behavioral signals, all the indicators of a threat. But they failed to identify him.
So in that report, as best as I can surmise, you disclosed that you divested $100,000 or more in a variety of different stocks, which I presume was pursuant to the ethics agreement that you negotiated with the Department of Justice. In that same report, there's a disclosure regarding purchases of 2 different transactions. So between $15,000 to $50,000 in a national coffee house chain, and between $50,000 to $100,000 in a semiconductor company on May 9th and May 12th. Are those transactions that you're doing personally, or are these through a stockbroker, or are these transactions that you're handling yourself?
So how they happen is I submit proposals under DOJ guidance to say, hey, I would like to trade this or that, and they run their review, and the FBI runs a review, and then they come back and say yes or no, and then I make the transaction.
Is there a reason that you decided to make the purchases into those 2 companies?
Generally speaking, I before I got this job, I was, trading stocks, but not a lot like most people. And I just follow certain industries, and I thought they would be a good investment.
So the reason why I ask, right, because you had divested in other companies.
Yeah.
And I presume that wasn't because there were actual conflicts. It's just that you wanted to avoid an appearance of impropriety.
It was both.
Both.
Yeah.
But not all of the companies were conflicts.
Whatever they make
divested from.
I don't make the call, they make the call.
Sure.
Yeah.
I guess my point would be, the reason why I ask this, why I said it's not a gotcha question, I have for years led an effort here in Congress to try to ban members of Congress, senior executive officials, from trading stocks. And it's bipartisan in nature. We're working really hard to get that done, Republicans and Democrats. And you can understand, I think, sure, given your role, given the nature of the position that you hold as the leader of the largest law enforcement agency in our country, that divesting entirely, not doing day trading now, I think would be something that would be in the interest of the American people. So I just would hope you would consider that, and that moving forward, that perhaps not purchasing stocks in individual companies, I would think would be something that would be worth pursuing.
Gentleman's time is...
I'm happy to give the witness an opportunity to...
No, thank you. I'll work with you on it.
Gentleman from...
And when Patel responds, you can hear the bureaucratic shrug baked into. The platforms are too big. We need more cooperation. Too much data. Not enough oversight. This is the same loop we have heard for years. After Buffalo, after Uvalde, after Parkland, after every single preventable tragedy. A system designed to tell us it's overwhelmed instead of admitting it's under-resourced, politically constrained, and unwilling to confront the corporations that profit from the chaos. But then Neguse pivots. And this, right here, is where the air shifts. He asks Patel, calmly, deliberately, why he's making individual stock purchases while leading the most powerful domestic law enforcement institution in the country. And this isn't a gotcha. This is a baseline ethical question. A question rooted in the simple idea that people who wield public power should not behave like day traders. Because when the head of the FBI is buying up to $100,000 in semiconductor stocks, it's not about the legality of the transaction. It's about the message it sends. It's about the erosion of trust. It's about the growing belief, fueled by real observable behavior, that public officials treat government like a side gig on top of their investment portfolio. Patel's answer is so revealing precisely because it's so empty. He says, I follow certain industries. I thought they'd be a good investment. That's the logic of a private citizen, not the logic of someone responsible for the national security architecture of the United States. Not the logic of someone who commands an agency with deep involvement in cybersecurity, technology supply chains, and corporate counterintelligence. Neguse sees the danger instantly. It's not the trade itself, it's the optics, the perceived corruption. The idea that the people who enforce the law are also gaming the system behind closed doors. And this is where the conservative narrative always collapses. They want to tell you government is the problem, but somehow they never object when the people running the government act like investors, not public servants. They scream about elites, but defend behavior that protects elites exclusively. They lament the decline of trust in institutions, while endorsing the behavior that destroys it. This is what conservative rhetoric never admits. Corruption is not just explicit deals or criminal acts. Corruption is structural. Corruption is cultural. Corruption is the quiet belief that public power can be used for private gain as long as the paperwork is tidy. And Neguse cuts through all of that with one simple truth. If you want the public to trust you, stop acting like you're above them. He connects the dots conservatives want you to ignore. You cannot rebuild faith in law enforcement while it repeatedly fails to identify threats online. You cannot restore trust in institutions while those institutions operate like Wall Street annexes. You cannot tell communities they are safe when the people in charge of safety behave like they're managing a personal investment strategy rather than safeguarding human lives. This is why misinformation spreads. Because when official conduct looks suspicious, when leaders seem self-interested, the public becomes primed for cynicism. Cynicism becomes mistrust. Mistrust becomes fertile ground for manipulation. And suddenly, extremist narratives flourish. This isn't abstract. This is democracy. Real democracy. It lives or dies based on whether people believe their institutions work for them. And that is the fight we are in. Not left versus right, not red versus blue. It's justice versus the normalization of corruption. It's accountability versus selective outrage. It's truth versus the narratives crafted by political operatives who think the American public is too exhausted to notice the contradictions. So if you want clarity, not noise, if you want analysis, not propaganda, if you want a community that refuses to settle for cosmetic reforms and performative leadership, then you're in the right place. True liberty is not just a channel. It's a collective demand for better, for truth, for democratic integrity, for a country where public service actually means service to the public. And yes, this moment matters. Because when a congressman quietly dismantles the illusion of ethical neutrality at the top of the FBI, he's not just questioning one man. He's questioning the culture of power itself. Stay here. Stay critical. Stay loud. And stay committed to a democracy that earns your trust instead of demanding it without accountability.